You're listening to the Devil Dog Talk Show.
This show contains explicit material and is recommended for ages 18 and older for mature audiences only. But hey, it's the internet.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Devil Dog Talk Show. Today we have a very near to my heart show that we're going to be bringing an amazing man and a great foundation that really serves the community that nobody really talks about, right? The hidden heroes, the caregivers that really help provide so much care in the United States to those who are very, very disabled or going through illness. So we want to welcome Steve Schwab. Hey, Steve, how you doing today, man? Thank you for being on.
Joey, it's an honor to be with you, buddy.
I'm so excited, and we got to jump right into it because there's just so much to talk about. Let's start with this. Steve, how did you get involved in foundations like the Elizabeth Dole Foundation? Have you always been dedicated to service? How'd you get involved in this type of?
Yeah, Joey, I love this question because at the root of everyone is their story. And my story is rooted in my family. I'm one of 7 boys called the 7 Schwab boys. No sisters, a lot of testosterone in my family growing up. And we're thick as thieves. And we have a mom and a dad that we worship. And one day my dad came home from work. He spent 40 years working for Eastman Kodak Company. We're a Rochester family. So if you know that city, Kodak really built it. And after 40 years of working at Kodak, he came in, he held a family meeting, tears in his eyes, and he said to us, his 7 boys, the lesson of the last couple of years as I'm retiring is do work that's meaningful to you. Live a life of service to others as much as possible. And that stuck with me. And I went to school to study policy and became enamored with our form of government, democracy, and the way that the United States has led the world towards freedom and peace is something that really got me going as a kid. And so I worked in government and politics, policy, and then I started working for causes that helped vulnerable communities. And my family also has military service, and my uncles and my nephews. And so when I met Senator Elizabeth Dole over the course of my cause work, and she told me about this experience she was going through with her husband at the peak of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and realizing, Joey, that there were veterans coming home from the longest period of war in U.S. history with injuries that would last their lifetimes. And she said she wanted to do something about it. I said, I'm all in. And that was 14 years ago. And it was her and I, and we were just figuring out what to do and what we needed to figure out and who we needed to talk to and what it was going to lead to. And 14 years later, we've built this movement, and it's been an extraordinary experience.
You know, that's very powerful that you bring in, the history, right? That your father was retiring and really incentivized, I should say, or highlighted the direction of going towards things that matter, right? The things that speak to your soul. And I love that because, being an FMF corpsman, I've seen those horrible injuries that you're just, right? And all the different types of residual effects that the longest war that we've had is giving, right? How the kids say, giving, right?
Yeah.
It's not good. And when you think about long-term care for these individuals, sadly enough, there's a lot of cancers, there's a lot of ALS, there's a lot of these exposures, and we're seeing such a detriment to our veterans, right, in our community, but also their spouses. Now, that's something that I really want to highlight for the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, right? Here's Elizabeth Dole, a clear spouse, providing care at some capacity, and then dedicating this program or the foundation, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, to really rooting out the next steps, right? How do we develop the next best way to help? And you brought this up in the op-ed with Emma Willis, right? And the op-ed was, how do we develop this infrastructure? So how did the Elizabeth Dole Foundation kind of get themselves into this position that they're clearly in now? How did you really get involved at that level where we're looking at what the gaps are, and now you're developing that infrastructure?
Yeah, this is a great question, Joey. And thank you for mentioning Emma Willis, Bruce Willis's wife. You know the movie Die Hard. You know Bruce, his storied Hollywood career. Emma marrying Bruce, having 2 daughters, never thinking or preparing that at a moment's notice he would be diagnosed with a neurological condition that would change both of their lives. And you're right. We did that op-ed. We've done a couple of talks across the country that have brought awareness to an issue that Elizabeth Dole really put her finger on as she was in and out of Walter Reed. And Joey, it involves you and your brother and sister veterans and families who were coming home from war, having sustained injuries, wounds, and illnesses that, frankly, in prior war eras, they wouldn't have survived. They didn't survive. And so the very construct of medicine changed with Iraq and Afghanistan. Our systems, the VA, DOD, and community health systems across the country were not prepared. You know that. I know that. They were absolutely not prepared for the long road of recovery that families and communities were going to inherit because of that new condition. That's what Senator Dole put her finger on. And on the infrastructure question you asked, super important, not always sexy, but super important. When we commissioned RAND, as we did in 2012, because we had no idea how big the issue was, Senator Dole said, I need some research to understand the complexity of this issue. RAND came back and said, this isn't a small issue. It's not a medium-sized issue. It's a gigantic gap that will be with us for the rest of time. Caregiving for military and veteran families is the new normal. Three RAND studies later, in the last 14 years, we've done 3 RAND studies. The population size is 14.3 million families like yours, Joey, who have a veteran and a caregiver. Some 5.5 million of them have kids who are serving as primary and secondary caregivers. The health system is not set up to be holistically supporting families in the way that it should. It's not set up for home-based care in the way that it should. It's definitely not set up to give you the benefits that the holistic benefits that you deserve. And we've done a lot of work on increasing benefits and support in the last 10 years. So it would have been irresponsible of us to not do the research to understand the dimensions of the issue, from infrastructure, as you say, to financial gaps, to mental and emotional health gaps, to gaps in home care, for us to then be able to do a sort of a coalition approach on how to attack it. And that's what we've been up to for the last 14 years.
You know, I'm really just kind of taken aback, right? Because most people, when they get involved in the veteran space, right? I've been around it for quite some time. And I've learned that there isn't this, I don't know, this resonance of significant urgency, right? And I noticed that with the caregivers and the hidden helpers and a lot of the different things that Elizabeth Dole Foundation brings to the conversation, of course, with the directional guidance of great research from the RAND Corp, I think it's called. I don't know.
Yeah,
the RAND
Corporation.
There we go. Yeah. The RAND guys. But we're learning as we're doing. And I noticed that there's a lot of change within the caregiver programs. And there's a lot of secondary fallout in communication. What type of way are we integrating with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation and these massive shoulds? How are we going to clear the mud, so to speak, and how do we get involved?
Joey, this is a really important question. And for anybody who's listening that is a member of the caregiving community or a veteran who's receiving in-home care from a caregiver who's part of the program for comprehensive assistance or the program of general support at VA, you use the word mud. That's actually kind of a light word to describe what's been happening in the ups and downs of this program. And even leaders at the VA would acknowledge. I sat with the deputy secretary 2 weeks ago, an incredible meeting with Dr. Paul Lawrence, who suggested that it's been unacceptable that there have been so many fits and starts in our support of caregivers. I'd say number one, because as you compare that to what VA's been doing for veterans since it was founded, decades ago, the phenomenon of supporting caregivers is new. So within the last 15 years, this is very pioneering work for VA. And by the way, for the country, because no one's doing anything close to what VA does for caregivers anywhere else. It's a model for what we ought to do in the rest of the country. But it's been unacceptable, the ways that there's been looseness around eligibility and understanding the way that assessments be made with families like yours. The variance in experience from VA to VA has been a challenge. And so we've been the tip of the spear on behalf of families like yours and others across the country, working with the VA to create standards around eligibility, uniformity around experience, uniformity around assessments. I mean, this is all scientific gobbledygook that says part of our role, in addition to the really important direct service work that we do, which is in a lot of ways, is it would be irresponsible for us as an organization not to spend a lot of time on advocacy and system reform. Because, Joy, say we give you and your wife a grant, a financial grant to help stabilize you or provide access to mental and emotional health services or support your child or another child who's a hidden helper. And then we put you back in a system that spits you out. And so that's happening a lot. But we've got good leaders like Dr. Lawrence, Secretary Collins, who want to get this right. And so we believe in working closely with the VA, DOD, and other agencies to get these things right for families, or we're wasting time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's a great way to highlight not only wasting time, we're wasting energy, we're wasting money, of course, but we really see that as a value exchange in the United States, right? How do we highlight, grants for certain families? How do we do this conversation where we get it right? How do we start communicating with Secretary Collins directly? Like, hey, these are the gaps we're seeing, and these are the solutions that are coming up, much like the Elizabeth Dole Act, right? Where there's this absolute direction. It's not this mystery. It doesn't seem to me, again, being on the inside, right? It doesn't seem to me that it's not a missed opportunity of we don't have solutions to apply to big problems. It seems to be this, I want to say, resonance of maybe confusion or what is or what's not. Now, to bring back up the Elizabeth Dole Act, right? I kind of want to talk about the type of perspective that you guys are bringing to the conversation and what the results or outcomes that are going to be expected with this.
So this legislation is transformative. It was the largest piece of veterans legislation passed in the last Congress. It comes after years of work suggesting to VA that there needs to be reforms across the board to better position the agency to support caregivers. Among the big headlines of the act, it increases the percentage of which families who are caring for, you mentioned ALS earlier. We have a number of families that we support, many numbers of families who are caring for a veteran with ALS, and they're undertaking costs that go beyond their benefit structure. They're getting reimbursed for 50 to 60% of those expenses. That needs to be 100%. This legislation does that. That aspect has just been finally implemented in the last couple of months. Joey, it's one thing for the legislation to be passed. It's got to be implemented, which is what we're pushing hard for. And that's part of what we talked to Dr. Lawrence about and Secretary Collins. Secretary Collins will be with us at our convening in a few weeks. So we'll continue to push an implementation. This also gives us a runway for the first time for us, for groups like ours, like the Elizabeth Dole Foundation and other organizations who you respect, Joey, and others do, to become advocates for your healthcare benefits in VHA. As you probably know, there are groups across the country that can advocate on behalf of your benefits for VBA at the Veteran Benefits Administration. Now we can become patient advocates at VHA to help you navigate the healthcare system. That's never been allowed. We've never had a sanctioned opportunity for organizations like ours to be patient advocates in the Veterans Health Administration. That's a huge part of this legislation. We're also going to increase mental health support for caregivers. There's going to be pilots on assisted living. VA doesn't offer assisted living right now whatsoever, never has. But I said earlier, we need to create a VA where it supports caregivers in a way that it hasn't. And because the Department of Veterans Affairs has never had an assisted living environment, it's now going to have the opportunity to do that. It basically creates a future where caregivers are empowered, veterans are healthier because of it, and our nation is not measured by headlines, but by negative headlines, but by lives that are made whole. And there is a really wide recognition with the implementation of so many more elements of this legislation that if we strengthen caregivers, we strengthen veterans. And when we strengthen veterans, we strengthen the country.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I've been living this type of life for the latter part of 16 years, right? This experience that so many caregivers and hidden helpers don't get the illumination or the shine that they deserve on the workload that they take on, that burden. And sadly enough, I understand that both sides of this table, we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to implement best solutions, and we're trying to talk about best practices as it's literally being created, right? Created step by step by organizations like the Elizabeth Dole Foundation and many others. What is it, would you say, is the number one key issue that caregivers are having to communicate on a congressional level where this would make the biggest impact tomorrow? If, let's say, somebody who had signatory powers, like we say in the entertainment world, right? If they just wiggled a little pen over a piece of paper, what would you say is the biggest pending issue to communicate?
I'd say one is we need to finalize the rule for the program for comprehensive assistance. I mentioned earlier that program has been paused. I can't even count how many times, Joey, that the program, and I think Haiti is a part of that program, isn't she?
Yes.
So caregivers like her and others' lives have been turned upside down by that program being started and stopped. And implementing the final rule to set that program on a permanent path needs to be implemented. So that would be one magic wand I'd want to wave. There's another, the Caregiver Re-Education, Reemployment, and Retirement Act, which is a big priority of our policy and legislative agenda this year, would do an incredible amount of work to position caregivers to have the financial tools, and their families, their veterans and their families, to have the financial tools, the flexibility, and the support to pursue educational pursuits, to be put on a path of financial viability, to in some ways set them up with some of the early benefit structures that veterans have been privileged to have from our country. You know, the VA changed its motto 3 years ago, Joey, and this was a symbolic win, but after 13 years of work, this was again 3 years ago, the VA expanded its motto to support veterans, their caregivers, families, and survivors. That was a big acknowledgement by the VA that it exists to support veterans, but it can only do so by supporting those people around them. You know how life works with Haiti at your side, and how families are critical in the health, wellness, and recovery of our nation's veterans. And so I'd wave a magic wand across Congress and the VA and DOD for them to get that everything that they have to do moving forward needs to holistically include the spouse, sibling, or family member who's caring for them, their kids who are part of that family ecosystem, and any of the extended family and friends around them, or work communities around them that are vital to their health, wellness, and recovery. The last thing I'll say is, in America, there's 100 million caregivers, Joey. That means a third of this country is impacted by caregiving. If you're not a caregiver now, you will be at some day in your life. The other magic wand I'd want to wave is for Americans to wake up and start talking about these issues at their kitchen table like they do with their kids with college, with retirement, with going into the armed services, that at some point in their lives, they're going to be responsible for caring for their wife, their husband, their parents. This is a new American tradition, as traditional as the apple pie that we celebrate in America. Caregiving is the new normal. And so as families and citizens, we need to prepare for that.
You know, I see that as a very important thing for all of us to talk about, especially our family. Me and our family, my family, we talk a lot about preparedness, what to do next, what happens if, right? What Heidi can really, see as a supportive system, or what can actually be felt as a tangible outcome, where these actionable solutions that we're discussing can really take effect, but only if it's well enough communicated to the community. And I understand it. The community, it's a crab trap, all right? In the veteran community, it is a crab trap between if you lean this way or that, and people you're right, they don't want to talk about these major issues that affect us all, regardless of leaning which direction. We still have to be taking that left and right step forward together. Now, I'm really interested in the face the fight. Now, because we brought up the caregivers and the dilemmas that they face as well as the veterans, the mental health issues within the United States are excruciatingly poor. Suicide has been one of those things that my family and I have discussed extensively for many years, and we discuss it in a way where we don't assign shame or blame. We just talk about it. If it's this, if it's that, what is getting us to there? Recently, I learned from Carla, I believe. She was telling me about the spouse suicide and the epidemic of spousal suicide within the military and the caregivers that serve our 14.3 million person community. What is the face the fight, and how can that help potentially this situation with mental health?
Yeah, Face the Fight is a really important initiative. You know that far too many veterans, your brother and sister veterans, are dying every day by suicide. And it's happening inside of a national epidemic around mental health and suicide. So we have to remember, veterans are people too. We often get trapped inside of our military and veteran bubble and forget that we're part of the wider citizen population in America. And so this epidemic of suicide's happening inside of a wider epidemic. That said, USAA took a big risk a few years ago. Storied company dedicated to this community, gives more resources than any other to the military and veteran ecosystem. And they said, we're going to be bold and dedicate our corporate social responsibility activities to one really important initiative, and that's reducing veteran suicide. And they came to partners like us. They've been a longtime partner, and they said, what do you think? And we said, this is bold. We think it's necessary. We think it's going to have to take a coalition approach, because there's a lot of organizations been working on this initiative for a long time. And we should challenge other companies and foundations to get involved. And so the Humana Foundation, Reach Resilience and Endeavors Foundation, based in Texas, stood up alongside USAA and pledged close to $85 million out of the gate. $85 million is a lot of dough. And turned to us at the Dole Foundation to build the coalition framework, where coalition building is in our DNA. It's how we do a lot of the work that we do since we've started. And so we've recruited over 250 organizations that are from every part of the country. These are folks who've been in the trenches on mental health and suicide. And Face the Fight does three things. One, it's a stigma busting, culture busting campaign to make sure that veterans know that it's okay to ask for help, that Americans understand the seriousness and complexity of this issue, and that people are going to do something about it. The second is that we're making targeted grants to organizations who show evidence, research-based evidence, that they're making a difference. And the University of Texas is our scientific partner. They're one of the best in the country, guiding those investments to make sure they go to organizations that are making a difference. And the third, as you might imagine, Joey, all these organizations, all 250 plus of them, we're now coordinating in ways that we weren't before. So we're not replicating on one area or another. We're comparing notes. We're aligning. we're sort of undergirded by strategies that we've built at Face the Fight to guide our efforts, and we're all swimming in a new direction together. So it's really exciting. We have just projected, based on our dynamic data model, that to date we're projecting to save over 10,000 lives through 2030. There's a lot of lives saved by virtue of the work of this coalition, and every one of those 10,000 is a person. And so we've got to address some of the hard issues head on, which is ensuring people ask for help, ensuring that those most at risk get the help they need, ensuring that loosely available firearms are in a lockbox so that if a veteran or a caregiver or a family member has an episode, that's not readily available. It's the number one reason why people die by suicide is a readily available firearm right at that moment when they're having a bad day. Not to threaten access to a firearm altogether, just to make sure that's not available when they need it.
Well, that's a very strong point, because it conflicts with people's natural instinct to not want to do certain things. But you're right. If you're in a moment and you're spiraling, right, there's a direction. And this is the reason why I talk about it so very well, because I understand that. I'm a huge staunch supporter of the Second Amendment, and I believe it or not, all of the amendments and all the rights God gives us.
Yes.
And I think it's a valid talking point to kind of hit home with, because of how access provides just more space for incidents, right? I'm very, very, very sadly enough informed about children that have access, right? Whether the by accident or intentional. That is something that I never wanted to research in my life, but it became a certain subject matter that was very important, and that kept popping up. Is that quick access that I'm not gonna, and I'm dedicated, because again, it's efficient, right? As illogical as that may seem to a healthy mind, put yourself in the other shoes. Of course, that's going to be an issue. So to move forward a bit on some better constructs, I would say, about access, right?
Yeah.
How do we access the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, and how do we get involved with the Face the Fight and all these great organizations in this coalition of the 250? That's what I'm going to start calling it. The coalition of 250, right?
I love it. Well, let me address that one right away. If you are engaged in any kind of mental health support or services that touch on emotional, financial constraints for families, and you're interested in being a part of a family of organizations that are working together to reduce veteran suicide, go to wefacethefight.org, which is the website where you can sign up to join the coalition. And we review those applications on an every other week basis, and then we meet with these organizations and bring them on. Strength in numbers, and we need as many organizations that are doing this work to get involved as possible. As it relates to the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, elizabethdolefoundation.org, we have the largest peer support community for caregivers in the country. It's called EDF Connect, where caregivers like Haiti can connect with other caregivers and learn about all the resources and support that we offer at the Dole Foundation. And by the way, not just what we offer, but what our peer organizations offer all across the country. We have the Bob Hope Critical Financial Assistance Program, where we make grants to families to help them stabilize financially and then put them on a path to long-term financial health. We have mental health and emotional health programs and workshops for families. Those are growing. I'd say one of the best and most in demand programs that we offer is our resource navigation work. We have a team of dedicated staff, many of whom come from military families, Joey, who help veterans and caregivers optimize their benefits. So let's make sure you're getting everything you should from the VA and public health benefits that you might be unaware of that you're eligible for. And they are like the angels among us on our team, who, when someone's having a complicated issue or an access issue, that team helps you work it out. So I would say anybody who needs the help, make sure you contact us, and we're here for you.
Amazing resources. And I'm really excited to share this with our audience globally because veterans, believe it or not, they go everywhere. So I'm really happy that we were able to connect today, Steve. And for our listeners to kind of go off on a high note, what would be the best message that they could be given by you today? Given the history, given your commitment to service, and given the fact that the Elizabeth Dole Act and all these different coalitions are 250, right? All these great things where people are getting together. What would be the message for us all from you today to lead us in that direction better?
My number one message that I want everybody to hear today, tomorrow, and the next day is you are not alone. You're never alone. In good days, in bad days, in peak days, and days of sorrow. We're here for this community 24/7. And if we can't support you, we have an organizational partner who will. And that there is pride, Joey, in raising your hand and asking for help. I've done it countless times. Maybe I do it countless times a day, Joey. I ask for help from my team, from my family. And I got to take pride in that because most of us human beings want to help our vulnerable friends and neighbors. That's the American way, right? And let's celebrate the best of America and this 250th year, like the humanity in each of us, and extend our hands of support. That's what we do every single day. That's what you're doing by allowing me to spend this time with you today and get this message out to the community. Let's help each other and our friends and neighbors be better Americans.